Let us pray. As we gather here today as members of Rotary, we are reminded that our commitment to service and to our fellow men and women is a role that follows us in every part of our day-to-day life. The struggle of that ongoing commitment is perhaps best captured in the words of Mother Teresa, who once said, "People are often unreasonable and self-centered. Forgive them anyway. If you are kind, people may accuse you of ulterior motives. Be kind anyway. If you are honest, people may cheat you. Be honest anyway. If you find happiness, people may be jealous. Be happy anyway. The good you do today may be forgotten tomorrow. Do good anyway. Give the world the best you have, and it may not be enough. Give your best anyway. For you see, in the end, it is between you and God. It has never been between you and them anyway." And now we ask that this food be blessed to our use and us to the service of all humankind. Amen.
Thank you, Rebecca. Chase Heatherly is on his way up to introduce visiting Rotarians and guests. If I can have somebody help me with the microphone. Thank you. Rusty told me last week he wasn't going to be available and asked Ellen to fill in for him today. She is unfortunately not able to stay till the very end, but we did get to enjoy that during the national anthem. So, Chase.
Good afternoon. I don't believe we have any visiting Rotarians today, so we do have a few guests. If we would like to stand along with our guests and introduce them, that would be great.
Hey, I'm Glenn Matthews, and I have with us Beth Robinson from Epworth Children's Home, and she is the volunteer coordinator.
I'm Carrie Powers, and I have Kim Mitchell with us today from Castle Brothers Heating and Cooling.
I'm John Iring, and I have with me Chuck Lamarck. He is in the process of building a hospital in Liberia. Welcome, Chuck.
Any other guests? Pick me up. Right here, in front.
I'll do it from there. Okay. I'm Lane Lincoln, and my guest today is Dr. Tommy Harrell, Senate Tommy. Thank
Any
you.
other guests? All right, thanks so much.
Welcome to all of our visiting Rotarians and guests today. A cell phone was left up front, and we have one announcement coming from the back. Jack, Dot?
Yes.
Oh, we missed one.
This is Charlotte Canine. I think if you know Charlotte, there at Allen Canine, and a dear friend of mine, I'm Dr. Royal. Welcome her and love to have her.
Sorry we missed you, Charlotte. Welcome to the Columbia Rotary Club. We're glad you're here today. Oh, found the cell phone. That's great. People feel naked without their cell phone. Catherine Davis is going to be on her way up to deliver our health and happiness today.
Good afternoon. Gee, thank you, Elliot. I appreciate that. It is a great day. It's a special birthday. I'm 16 again. Anyway, I have a couple of announcements. Tom Gammon, who's here, advised me that he was vacationing in Naples, Florida recently, and he ran into a past president of the Columbia Rotary Club, and that is Bobby Blanton. And he caught up with him, they had a great time, and guess what? He's still going to Rotary. So that's a good thing. We want to congratulate Lee Lumpkin, who is right in the center of the room. Wave your hand, stand, take a bow. She had her successful, wonderful performance of Le Corsaire, and that was the Columbia Classical Ballet, of which she's chair of the board, and we want to give her a round of applause. Mason Hardy let me know that the AC Flora Junior Varsity and Varsity Cheerleaders won their competition held at Lexington High School Wildcat Invitational, and they took all the top prizes. They were they were number one, they got first place, and also of note is his daughter, who is in the 8th grade, who was also participating in those competitions. So congratulations, Mason, and to those Okay, so do you all know what the topic of today's speaker is? Sure. Yes, no, maybe. Yes? Yes. How many do not know what the topic is today? Okay. Well, they're in for a treat. Whether you know what the topic is or whether you don't know what the topic is, you're in for a treat. So I'm going to give you a lot of Christian jokes so that you all will be forgiven whatever may come into your minds during his performance or his speaking engagement or ours. This night is not going to make it. But anyway, one lustful joke I do have. A man was sitting on a plane headed to the big city for some fun. He found himself sitting next to a beautiful single woman. He struck up a conversation with her and soon asked her what kind of man did she like. She replied, "I love Native American Indian men with their high cheekbones and golden tan colored skin. I also like Jewish men who are brilliant and very successful. And I even like good old boys from the South with their long Southern drawl." She found herself asking him, "What is your name?" And the man replied, "My name is Geronimo Bernstein, but my friends call me Bubba." That was the innocent one, right? That was as good as I could get. Anyway, a 92-year-old man went to the doctor for a checkup. The next day, the doctor saw the man walking through town with a young, beautiful woman on his arm. The doctor asked him, "What are you doing?" The man replied, "Just following your advice, Doc." The doctor asked, "What advice was that?" The man said, "Well, yesterday you told me to get a hot mama and be cheerful." The doctor said, "No, I said you have a heart murmur and to be careful." A minister is driving down the road and is stopped for speeding. The state trooper smells alcohol on his breath, sees an empty wine bottle on the floor, and asks, "Sir, have you been drinking?" The minister replies, "Just water." The trooper asks, "Then why do I smell wine?" The minister looks down at the bottle and exclaims, "Good Lord, he's done it again." All right, I've got another one for you. A man arrives at the gates of heaven. St. Peter asks, "Denomination?" The man says, "Methodist." St. Peter looks down his list and says, "Go to room 24, but be very quiet as you pass room 8. Another man arrives at the gates of heaven. Denomination? Lutheran. Go to room 18, but be very quiet as you pass room 8. A third man arrives at the gate. Denomination? Presbyterian. Go to room 11, but be very quiet as you pass room 8. The man says, "I can understand there being different rooms for different denominations, but why must I be quiet when I pass room 8? St. Peter tells him, "Well, the Baptists are in room 8 and they think they're the only ones here." garbage collector, and a lawyer. Teacher, garbage collector, and a lawyer wound up together at the pearly gates. St. Peter informed them that in order to get into heaven, they would each have to answer one question. St. Peter addressed the teacher and asked, what was the name of the ship that crashed into the iceberg? They just made a movie about it. The teacher answered quickly, that would be Titanic. St. Peter let him through the gate. St. Peter turned to the garbage man, and figuring heaven didn't really need all those odors that this guy would bring with him, decided to make the question a little harder for him. How many people died on the ship? Fortunately for him, the trash man had just seen that movie too and answered, about 1,500. That's right, you may enter. Finally, St. Peter turned to the lawyer, and his question was actually not one. He said, name them. All right, so today some of you know that it's my birthday, and I told you it was a very special day. It is a day, a special occasion for me. It's been that way every day of the year because I celebrate every day like it is a birthday. But when we were children, we looked forward to a birthday with anticipation and excitement, and as adults, a birthday often is a time for reflection and renewal. And I've been doing a lot of that lately. But I would like you to know that I'm extremely blessed to see yet another birthday, and it is truly a special day for me. Because I got to do health and happiness on the day that we hear about the brothel in South Carolina. I can't get over it. But anyway, I hope that the coming year will be filled with health, happiness, and success. For me, my family, my friends, and of course my fellow Rotarians. Have a wonderful week.
Great job as always, Catherine. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Hope you have a good one. It's hard to be here by 12:30 every week, and if you don't come early, it's hard to make time to talk to people and get to know each other. That's why we've been doing a few table socials. We're going to do another one now for the next few minutes. We're running ahead of schedule, so please take a few minutes and get to know your fellow Rotarians.
Thank you.
announcements from me. Next week we'll do an induction, so if you are sponsoring a member, you should have already been contacted. We just want to make sure you're aware of that coming up next week. Wednesday is World Polio Day, and at the State House our district is gathering at 1 o'clock this Wednesday, the 24th. This has been in the newsletter, so you're invited to attend, wear your In Polio Now t-shirt, and come support the district in this campaign. As you know, it's also Polio Awareness Month, and the district has matching funds for any gifts that are given to Polio Plus this month. So if you have been waiting to give to the Rotary International Foundation, and you think now's a good time, this would be a good month to do it. We could take advantage of a match up to $25,000 from the district to make sure our dollars go as far as they can. Mason Hardy, who is our committee chair for Rotary International, he has the list. So if you're curious how close you are to your next Paul Harris Fellow, you can certainly see Mason and he can let you know. The board will meet this Thursday at 8 a.m. at Eggs Up Grill, so I hope to see everybody there. And Sandra Owensby told me to remind everybody who's involved on the Free Little Library Committee. There will be a committee meeting right after today's meeting here, so please see Sandra, who is sitting right over there. Lastly, I spoke to Hal Stevenson, who could not be here today. He's traveling. He got up here a couple weeks ago and made an appeal for our Veterans Day program, which is coming up on the 12th. We're having 17 veterans from World War II and the Korean War come, as well as their caregivers, and he said, it would be nice if we were able to treat all of these people to lunch. He said he had 14 different people come up to him to commit, so thank you so much for that. And then I had a 15 person come up to me today to say they would pay for the balance of those folks. We don't know how many caregivers are coming, but it would be nice if we were able to treat them to lunch also. So if you're interested in doing that, bring me your business card, send Hal an email just after the meeting, grab me, and that's just a nice planning for our upcoming Veterans Day program. And I think that is it for me. So I'm happy to introduce Lane Ligon, who is going to introduce our speaker today.
Thank you, President Stephen. I appreciate that. I saw Bob Barnum almost stand up when they were talking about the Methodist preacher going to heaven. And David Hodges did the same thing when they talked about the Lutheran. I understand that. And I did hear that Jimmy Derrick had a token from the Sunset Lodge and he was trying to sell it to Scott at half price out in the lobby. It's my honor and distinct privilege today to introduce our speaker, David Hodges. David was born in Columbia and went to A.C. Moore, Hand, and Trier. He graduated from USC and entered the insurance business with Mass Mutual at the age of 24. And he continues to work there full time. He's been on the board of the Central Carolina Community Foundation, and he served as chairman of the State Museum Foundation. He's currently serving on the board of the South Carolina Humanities and on the board of several other organizations, including the Cooperative Ministry. He's a member and an elder at First Presbyterian Church here in Columbia. He's been married for 43 years to a wonderful gal, Susan Grable Hodges, who owns the Happy Cafe, and many of you have been there. He has 4 children and 8 grandchildren, and his topic today is one of great interest to so many of us, the Sunset Lodge.
Anthony, it won't be so bad.
Straight up.
I had a cousin who used to say, this is a true story, but I'm going to tell it anyway. Many people, you know why I get this thing organized here. Many people have told me stories about the Sunset Lodge in Georgetown, and I believe many of them are true. I just don't know which ones. This is the challenge of an oral history of a brothel. No one kept records, no one took pictures, no one put the story of his visit, of to the Sunset Lodge in its journal. There are no written first-person accounts. The newspaper articles I read were, for the most part, embarrassingly romanticized versions of what the writer thought he or she should say about the, quote, house of ill repute, end quote. This presentation today is as factual as I can make it. In 1935, there were a half a dozen brothels in Florence, South Carolina, a town of 15,000 people. Florence was a railroad town. By 1940, the train station was the busiest in South Carolina with 14 passenger trains every day. Train stations and brothels went together. Florence was overrun with houses of prostitution. A man stepped up to run for mayor of Florence on the platform of firing the chief of police for having failed to having shut down the brothels. The candidate's name was D.E. Ellerby. That would be Louisa Campbell's granddaddy, Binky Tobias's father. D.E. Ellerby won that race. He beat a man who had been mayor 25 years. At the first city council meeting after the election, the council fired the man who had been chief of police 14 years, along with 3 members of the police department. That was in 1935. One of the brothels was owned by Hazel Weiss. She arrived in Florence in 1928 from Chicago. She bought property on Commander Street, which is about 4 blocks from the train station. The 1930 census listed Hazel as the owner of a boarding house with 3 boarders, all single women under 25 years old. Within 1 year of Louisa Campbell's granddaddy's election, Hazel was making plans to move to Georgetown, South Carolina. Why Georgetown? Everyone suffered during the Depression. In Georgetown, the Atlantic Coast Lumber Company closed, the railroad stopped running, and the banks were shut down. The good news was that virtually all of the old rice plantations in Georgetown County had been purchased by northern rich men. They hunted ducks, and they spent money. More good news, the coastal road, which is now Highway 17, connecting Maine to Florida, was completed in 1935. More good news was that the Intracoastal Waterway was near completion, which allowed a boat to travel the East Coast without going into the ocean. And the really good news was the International paper announced in 1936 the immediate construction of the largest paper and pulp mill in the world in Georgetown. And finally, good news for Hazel's move was that Tom Yawkey owned 40,000 acres in Georgetown County. Tom Yawkey owned the Boston Red Sox baseball team, and he was one of the 50 wealthiest Americans in America during the Depression. Hazel Weiss decided to move to Georgetown. She bought a house in 1936 on the coastal road, Highway 17, 3 miles south of Georgetown, on the road to Charleston. The cost of the house was 90% of her annual income. She borrowed the money from Tom Yawkey. Tom Yawkey told an employee he had never been paid back for a loan as rapidly as Hazel Weiss paid him back. That she would walk into his office with bags of cash. She bought more land in 1937, 1939, and 1941, until she had 20 acres of land around her house. She was in business in Georgetown for 33 years, from 1936 until 1969. From Franklin Roosevelt to Richard Nixon. From sitting by a console radio listening to a fireside chat, to watching Gomer Powell on a color television set. From Amelia Earhart to Neil Armstrong, she became a rich and powerful woman. Her fee in 1936 was $3. I wondered how expensive that was in 1936. The book, Gone with the Wind, was published also in 1936 and was criticized for costing so much. It cost $3, the same. The book sold 176,000 copies in 1936, and by 1938, Gone with the Wind had sold over 1 million copies. So I decided that there were plenty of men who would have chosen a Sunset Lodge experience over owning a copy of Gone with the Wind. Hazel increased her price over time until she was charging $20 by the time she closed in 1969. A man in Charleston told me that his dream was to have $20 and enough gas to get to Georgetown and back, and he never had either. The 1940 census was released a few years ago. The federal census is on a 72-year delay. So the 1950 census will be released in 2022. So the 1940 census said that Hazel Weiss owned a boarding house in Georgetown, and she claimed her annual income was $3,033. The 1940 Federal Wage and Salary Report for South Carolina showed that there were 76,000 men and 23,000 women working in the category of rural non-farm. Of those 76,000 men, 1,400 made over $3,000. Of 23,000 women, 26,000 women, 23 made over $3,000. Hazel was in year 4 of 33 years, and she already was building wealth. When she died in 1974, her probated estate was $175,000, roughly $1.5 million today. She grew up in Indiana, moved to Chicago during the era of prohibition and speakeasies and organized crime. She had a child in 1919, a son who had Hazel's maiden name at birth and who later changed it to his dad's name. He lived in Indiana. A few years later, Hazel married a bartender. The lucky guy was John Weiss, who sued Hazel for divorce. He testified she possessed a high temper and that she frequently cursed him and that she did not take care of him. John got his divorce, but Hazel kept the Weiss name for the rest of her life, thereby cloaking her son in anonymity. In 1948, Hazel bought a house at Folly Beach as a getaway for her employees. In 1949, her 30-year-old son bought the house next door at Folly Beach. And then Hazel bought a second house at Folly Beach for herself. In 1968, the year before she closed the Sunset, Hazel sold both of her houses to unrelated buyers, but her son sold his house to Hazel for $5 in love and affection. Men arrived in Georgetown by car and by boat and by airplane. There was considerable commerce on Front Street because of the Sunset Lodge. One person said Hazel was a tourist destination. Cars arrived every day looking for the Sunset Lodge. I have heard many stories of men riding around town with out-of-state license tags. One man told me his 10-year-old son didn't know what the Sunset Lodge was, but he could give excellent directions. The marina on Front Street competed with other marinas up and down the East Coast. The marina manager told me that the owners of yachts in New York would tell their ship captains to take their boats to Miami for them to use when they arrived. Invariably, the boats would break down in Georgetown. The marina manager told me he would ask the ship captain what he wanted him to put on the bill for the repair. I've heard many stories of groups of men who went to the beach to hunt, to fish, to play golf, and who did none of those things. One group of men, I'm told, went by the fish house to buy fish to take home. When Hazel arrived in Georgetown, there was only a grass runway on Merriman Road. During World War II, the Army Air Force built an airport with concrete runways across the road from the Sunset Lodge. The government deeded the airport to the county after the war. Hazel now had customers who could arrive by airplane and still get home for dinner. A friend of mine reported a $50 tip for driving a man from the airport across the highway to the Sunset and then back to his airplane. The dark side to the fascinating and fun stories of the Sunset Lodge is the immorality. Hazel Weiss engaged in destructive human behavior. How much pain did she create in families? How many relationships were damaged or destroyed? How many men were consumed with guilt? What impact was there on the women who worked there? I talked to dozens of people and heard countless stories about the Sunset Lodge, many of them hysterically funny. But I had never heard of a family broken or of a child torn by the tension of family strife. Is it possible it never happened? Of course it happened. But no one wants to share those stories. Those stories cut too deep. They're too personal, too hurtful. Hazel's brothel was no different than any other house of prostitution, but she lived in a time and a place that allowed her to build a business that was different. So different that here we are, 50 years later, telling stories about a woman who dominated the PD area and in actually the entire state of South Carolina. How did she do it? First, she gave away a lot of money. A lot of money. It may have been her business model, but it was effective. One woman from Georgetown referred to Hazel as our own United Way. One person told me volunteers for an annual fundraising group always tried to get Hazel's envelope because it was an automatic gift. I've seen Hazel's name in the Georgetown Times for her contributions to the Easter Seals and the March of Dimes. She gave money each year to seal Ford's store on Front Street to make 30 baskets of food to distribute at Thanksgiving. She gave money to families of men who died in a work accident or who had a house burned down. I've heard rumors of her donating money to sponsor a Little League baseball team, to add to the hospital, and even to a church capital campaign. The word is she tried to donate more money each year than International Paper donated. Secondly, Hazel ran her business her way. She controlled her employees. She would not let them go to Front Street unless they were conservatively dressed. She made them go in pairs, never alone. She made them ride with Hazel's chauffeur or take a cab. She made them go to the doctor every Monday morning. She put the doctor's certificate of good health under the glass by the bedside table. She trained her employees not to look at men on the sidewalk. No soliciting, no loitering. Hazel was not about to embarrass the residents of Georgetown. She had a single location and men had to go to her. She sent new employees to the bank to open savings accounts. She was in a cash business, and by Monday she wanted that cash out of her building. The bank tellers were trained to open new accounts and to ask no questions. Once a woman gave her address as Route 2, Box 300. Hazel and her employees shopped on Front Street. Hazel bought a new car every year and took her employees to buy cars. She bought food every day, supplies, furniture, jewelry, clothes, shoes, dry cleaning. Her employees bought whatever they wanted. They had plenty of money. The son of one business owner told me his dad's jewelry store lost $40,000 revenue the Christmas season that the Sunset Lodge closed. Women stayed at the Sunset for about a year. Where did they come from and where did they go? I've heard there are circuits where women moved around, went to Jacksonville, Birmingham, Raleigh. I've also heard some employees were military wives. I've wondered about organized crime. When they closed their savings accounts, they generally had over $8,000. The average income in South Carolina in 1960 was $4,000. Finally, Hazel was powerful politically. How did she avoid arrest when she first opened her brothel in 1936? Did Tom Yawkey protect her? I've heard Hazel spent time in Columbia with influential politicians. The South Carolina legislature informally adjourned 1 week every spring. The same week that Hazel closed the Sunset Lodge to all customers except legislators and judges. There was never a concerted effort to shut her down. One man in Georgetown went to the grand jury every year and asked that she be arrested, but nothing ever happened. A group of ministers went to see the sheriff to demand that the Sunset Lodge be closed. The sheriff responded, "Preachers come and go, but we have to live here. Send me your elders and your deacons, and I'll shut it down." But nothing ever happened. Her customers were the rich and the powerful. An old story in Georgetown tells of the low numbers on the license tags, both in-state and out-of-state. One of the few published stories about the Sunset Lodge was in a book written by Senator Nick Ziegler from Florence. Any of his children here? I haven't seen it. The book is called Barnwell Blarney, about Frank Barnwell. Frank and his friend Hugh Wilcox went to Pawleys Island to check on the damage in 1954 of Hurricane Hazel. Frank told Hugh to pull into the driveway, that he wanted to speak to an old friend. They drove into the backyard of the Sunset Lodge and Frank knocked on the door. Hazel opened the door, squealed with delight, and gave Frank a big hug. They sat at the dining room table and Hazel pulled out the whiskey and Frank told stories. Women joined them upstairs and everyone laughed and had a big time. Frank turned to Hugh and said, "I may be a candle in polite society, but I am an arc light in a whorehouse." The Sunset Lodge closed in 1969. The sheriff was quoted in the paper saying Hazel asked him to close her down, and she may have. By 1969, she was 69 years old. She was ill, and she was tired. Georgetown in 1969 was not the same Georgetown in 1936. The sheriff had promised to close the Sunset Lodge after his election. My suspicion is that the sheriff and Hazel had talked about how and when to close the brothel. No one would be arrested, and Hazel was free to continue to live in the garage apartment behind the big house. I believe they had cut the deal by the time the sheriff asked a witness to go with him to the brothel in December '69 and sat at the dining room table and said, "Hazel, it's time." Hazel asked a young couple with 2 small children to buy her house. She held the paper, their mortgage, and she retained a life estate in the garage apartment. The couple said it took a long time for men to get the message. 10 cars a day stopped by for 3 years. The men invariably were embarrassed when they drove around back and saw the swing set. One day a bus from Fort Jackson pulled in the back. And the husband had to explain to the driver that they wasted a trip. He worried about the safety of his children. So he dug deep holes and put posts in the ground and hung a heavy chain between them. One day a car turned into the driveway and plowed into the chain, badly damaging his car. The husband ran over to make sure he was okay. And he asked him, "Didn't you see the chain?" "Yes," he said, "but I didn't believe it." Hazel's health got worse, and she moved to Ashley House in Charleston to be close to Rotary Hospital. In 1974, her trustee took her to Indiana, where she died on July 15. Her death certificate listed her occupation as retired investments.
Questions?
Robert?
How many women work there?
Best I can tell, usually a half a dozen or so. I've heard everything from 5 to 15. But they didn't really have time. They didn't have room. She didn't have room for 15. So I'm thinking 6. You might?
David, how did you go about doing your research? And once people found out you were doing this, were you like a magnet for stories?
It's been so much fun. People love to tell stories, and so I would look for the oldest people in Georgetown to talk to, and everybody has a story to tell. Particularly, now sometimes what they'll say is, well, I never went there. But let me tell you a story. Yes, sir.
Well, I just recently saw the movie, the rerun of Best Little Whorehouse in Texas. And as I heard your story, it was very similar to that of Miss Mona with the gifts and so forth. And I wondered if any of that play came from the Sunset Lodge.
I don't know. But I tell you, the book I'm publishing in mid-year is all from the Sunset Lodge. I've already completed the book.
I mean, down to the relationship with the sheriff, or the gifts.
Let me tell you, I don't know who's from Georgetown here, but you can't have that place open without a relationship with the sheriff.
David, is the lodge, is the house still there? I drive down that road all the time. I'm looking
Looking for it? It is directly across the street from the entrance to the airport. It was the couple who bought the house. The husband died, and then his wife, his widow, continued to live there. In 1992, she was on a trip, and someone broke into the house and stole the guns and set the house on fire, so it's gone. The garage apartment that Hazel lived in is still there, but the new owners then put up other little places to rent for work. Yes, sir.
Since you're interested in history and served in a museum, did they put a historical marker down there?
They have not. I'll talk to the mayor.
David, she has a
Yes.
Was it segregated or was it whites only?
It was whites only. I spent some significant time confirming that.
And that is on the girls' side as well?
Yes.
Okay.
And the one interesting thing, well, a lot of interesting things about Sunset, but unlike Florence, where they had 6 or 8 brothels and they could never get rid of them, in Georgetown, there was only one. And so there was an African-American brothel that got started up, and the sheriff shut it down. Who knew? So he wouldn't let any of the white ones, any black ones, nobody. Hazel had an exclusive. All right.
David, we appreciate you being here, and we look forward to the release of your book next year. That's exciting. I know that's a lot of work that culminated into that. Here's a small token of our appreciation for your time today. Next week, our speaker is our very own member, Governor Henry McMaster. So please come and bring guests. We will not end in song today because we don't have a piano. So I hope everybody has a great week.